All right, chapter 223, The Marriage. Yay, we get to see the wedding. It better turn out good. If the writers do something mean to Richard on his wedding day, I'm going to be really mad. The happy morning dawned. The weather was mild and beautiful. The sky was of a cloudless azure, and all nature seemed to smile with the gladness of an early spring. Markham rose at 7 o'clock and dressed himself in plain clothes, but upon his breast he wore the star which denoted his princely rank. And never had he appeared so handsome, no, not even when, with the flash of his first triumph upon his cheeks, he had entered the town of Estella and received the congratulations of the inhabitants. When he descended to the breakfast room, he found Mr. Monroe, Ellen, and Catherine already assembled. They too were attired in a manner which showed that they were not to be omitted from the bridal party. At 8 o'clock, the Grand Duke's carriage drove up to the door, and in a few minutes our hero and his friends were on their way to Richmond. Strange, thought Ellen to herself, that I should have passed my honeymoon of 24 hours with him in the same neighborhood whither Richard is now repairing to fetch his bride. The carriage rolled rapidly along. As the clock struck 9, it dashed up the avenue to the door of the now royal dwelling. Richard and his companions were ushered into the drawing-room, where the Grand Duke and the Duchess, with the aides-de-camp and a few select guests, were awaiting their arrival. The reception which Mr. Monroe, Ellen, and Catherine experienced at the hands of the royal pair was of a most cordial kind, and proved how favorably our hero had spoken of them. In a short time Isabella made her appearance, attended by her bridesmaids, the 2 daughters of an English peer. Richard hastened to present his friends to the princess, and the cordiality of the parents underwent no contrast on the part of the daughter. But if she were more courteous, nay kind, in her manner to either, that preference was shown towards Ellen. And it struck the young lady that such slight preference was evidenced towards her, for she turned a quick but rapid glance of profound gratitude upon Richard, as much as to say, "'Tis you whom I must thank for this." How lovely did Isabella seem, robed in white and her cheeks suffused with blushes. There was a charm of ineffable sweetness, a halo of innocence about her which fascinated the beholder even more than the splendor of her beauty. As she cast down her eyes and the long, slightly curling black fringes reposed upon her cheek, there was an air of purest chastity in her appearance which showed how nearly allied her heart was to the guilelessness of angels. And then her loveliness of person, oh, that was of a nature so ravishing, so enchanting, as to inspire something more than mere admiration, something nearer resembling a worship. Poets have compared eyes to stars, teeth to ivory, lips to coral, bosoms to snow. They have likened symmetry of form to that of sylphs and lightness of step to that of fairies. But poor indeed are all similitudes which we might call to our aid to convey an idea of the beauty of this charming Italian maiden, now arrayed in her bridal vestment. The ceremony was twofold, Richard being a Protestant and Isabella a Roman Catholic. A clergy of the Church of England therefore united them in the first instance by special license at the Grand Duke's mansion. The bridal party immediately afterwards entered the carriages, which were in readiness, and repaired to the Roman Catholic chapel in Hammersmith, where the hands of the young couple were joined anew according to the ritual of that creed. And now the most exalted of Richard's earthly hopes were attained. The only means by which his happiness could be ensured and a veil drawn over the sorrows of the past were accomplished. When he looked back to the first period of his acquaintance with Isabella, remembered how ridiculously insignificant was once the chance that his love for her would ever terminate in aught save disappointment, and then followed up all the incidents which had gradually smoothed down the difficulties that arose in his path, until the happy moment when he knelt by her side at the altar of God, he was lost in astonishment at the inscrutable ways of that providence which had thus brought to a successful issue an aspiration that at first wore the appearance of a wild and delusive dream. On the return of the bridal party to the mansion near Richmond, a splendid banquet was served up, and if there were a sentiment of melancholy which stole upon the happiness of any present, it was on the part of Isabella and her parents at the idea of separation. At length the déjeuner was over, and Isabella retired with her mother and bridesmaids to prepare for her departure. The Grand Duke took that opportunity to thrust a sealed packet into our hero's hand. A few minutes elapsed. Isabella returned. The farewells took place, and the bridegroom conducted his charming bride to the carriage. Mr. Monroe, Ellen, and Catherine followed in a second chariot. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Richard assisted his lovely young wife to alight at the door of his own mansion, and now Markham Place became the residence of the Prince and Princess of Montoni. I'm so happy for Richard. I just still remember when we first met him in the first volume, and he was just this little kid so lost in the world, and everything was going wrong. Yay! All right, we're not done yet, though. Here we go. Vain were it to attempt to describe the delight of the old butler when he beheld his master bring home that beauteous blushing bride, and, as he said in the course of the day to Mr. Monroe, it was only, sir, a due sense of that comportance which belongs to a man in my situation of authority over the servants that prevented me from collapsing into some of them antics that I indulged in when we heard of of his highness's successes at Castel Chicore. Oh, I love how Whittingham always pronounces things funny. It makes it hard to read, but it makes him such a fun character. Castel Chicore. And when he came home the day before yesterday, but I won't do it, sir, I won't do it. Although I don't promise, Mr. Monroe, he added in a mysterious whisper, that I shan't go to bed rather jolly tonight with champagne. So Whittingham's happy for him. It was 11 o'clock that night when Ellen cautiously issued from the back door of the mansion. She passed rapidly through the garden, passed out of the gate, and hastily ascended the hill on whose summit were the 2 trees. A man was seated on the bench. Ellen approached him, threw her arms round his neck, and embraced him with a tenderness that even appeared to surprise him by its warmth. She placed herself by his side, and he drew her towards him and kissed her almost affectionately. "Are you not happy?" said Ellen in a plaintive and anxious tone. "I knew that by the contents of the note which Marian gave me just now, and your manner confirms me in the opinion." "I know not how it is," replied Greenwood, without answering her question in a direct way, "but you never seemed dear to me, Ellen, until this evening." "And am I dear to you now?" she asked in a tone tremulous with joy. "You are," exclaimed Greenwood, speaking nevertheless in a manner which seemed to indicate that he was giving way to a feeling of weakness which he could not conquer, but of which he was ashamed. "You are dear to me, for my heart appears as if it required something to love, and someone to love me." "And do I not love you?" cried Ellen, pressing her lips to his. "Oh, there was a time when I never thought I could love you, when I only sought you as a husband because you were the father of my child. But since we have been united in holy bonds, I have learnt to love you, and I do love you. I do love you in spite of all that is past." "You are good, Ellen," said Greenwood, upon whose tear a lash stood, but he hastily dashed it away, explaining, "This is unlike me. What can be the cause of these emotions, hitherto unknown? Is it that I am envious of his happiness? Is it that I pine for that sweet domesticity which he will now enjoy? Or is it that I am wearied of a world false and hollow-hearted?" "Alas," cried Ellen, the tears streaming from her eyes, "is the world really false and hollow-hearted? Or have you sought only that sphere which wears the appearance that you deplore? Look yonder," she continued, pointing toward the mansion. "No falsehood, no hollow-heartedness there. And why? Because he who rules in that abode has encouraged every sweet sympathy that renders life agreeable, every amenity which inspires confidence and mutual reliance between a number of persons dwelling together. The sphere that he has chosen is purified by his own virtues. The light of his excellence is reflected from the hearts of all around him. All are good, or strive to be good, in his circle, because he himself is good. Where you have moved, ever agitating amidst the selfish crowd as in troubled waters, none are good, because no one sets a good example. Everything in your world is self. Everything in Richard's world he sacrifices self unto others. Hence his prosperity, his happiness. And hence my adversity, my dissatisfied spirit," exclaimed Greenwood impatiently. "But talk not thus, Ellen, any more. You will drive me mad." "Oh, my dear husband, what makes you thus?" cried Ellen in alarm. "I never saw you so before. You who were ever so cool, nay, pardon me if I say so chilling, so calculating, so inaccessible to the tenderest emotions, you are now an altered being. But God grant that your heart is touched at last, and that you will abandon those paths of selfishness which, as you have by this time learnt, are not those of permanent prosperity. Do not be offended with me. Heaven knows that I would not wound your heart, for I love you 10,000 times better tonight than ever I did before, and solely because you are changed, or appeared to be. Oh, let me implore you to cast aside your assumed name, to throw off all disguise, to return to that home where the arms of sincerest affection will be extended to welcome you." "No, Ellen," cried Greenwood almost furiously. "My pride will not permit me to do that. Speak no more in this way, or I will quit you immediately. I will fulfill my destiny, whatever it may be. Not a day, not an hour before the appointed time must he and I meet." Okay, he's basically admitted, right, that he's Richard's brother. We've known it for so long, but it's gotta be true. "No, broken though my fortunes may be, they are not irreparable. Had it not been for the flight of that villain Tomlinson, I should have retrieved them ere now. I must not, however, despair. My credit is still good in certain quarters, and I possess talents for finance and speculation to no mean order." But you will not again embark in any such venture as the forged bills, you would say, Ellen, added Greenwood hastily. No, be not alarmed on this head. I will not sully that name which he has rendered great. Oh, do you not remember, cried Ellen, as a sudden reminiscence shot through her brain, that on the morning when our hands were united, you promised that the name which you then gave me should go down to posterity? It will. The prediction is already fulfilled, Ellen, said Greenwood hastily, but not by me, he added mournfully. I know not why I feel so low-spirited tonight, and yet your presence consoles me. Richard now clasps his lovely bride in his arms, and we are forced to snatch this stolen interview, as if we had no right to each other's society. And whose fault is that? Asked Ellen, somewhat reproachfully. Is it not in your power to put an end to all this misery? I cannot, I will not, returned Greenwood with renewed impetuosity. No, let us not touch upon the topic tonight. My resolves are immovable on that point. If you love me, urge me not to inflict so deep a wound upon my pride. This lowness of spirits will soon pass away. I am afraid that envy or jealousy, rather, has in some degree depressed me, and yet envy is not the term, nor does jealousy express the true nature of my sentiments. For, in spite of all my faults, I have loved him, Ellen, as you well know. But it is that I feel disappointed, almost disgusted. I have as yet toiled for naught. I contrast my position with his, and that makes me mournful. Still, I am proud of him, Ellen. I cannot be otherwise. That is a generous feeling, said Ellen, again embracing her husband. It does me good to hear you express such a sentiment. I scarcely know what I have been saying, continued Greenwood. My mind is chaotic. My ideas are confused. Let us now separate. We will meet again shortly, and I will tell you of my progress toward the fortune which I am resolved to acquire. Yes, let us meet again soon, said Ellen. But not here, she added, glancing towards the trees. It makes you melancholy. Well, I will find another spot for our interviews. Farewell, Ellen, dearest Ellen. Farewell, my dearest husband. They embraced and separated, Ellen retracing her steps toward the mansion and Greenwood remaining on the hill. On the following morning, after breakfast, Richard conducted his lovely bride over the grounds belonging to the palace. When they had inspected the gardens, he said, I will now lead you to the hilltop, beloved Isabella, where you will behold those memorials of affection between my brother and myself, which mark the spot where I hope again to meet him. They ascended the eminence, and then stood between the two trees. But scarcely had Richard cast a glance toward the one planted by the hand of Eugene, when he started and dropped Isabella's arm. She threw a look of intense alarm on his countenance, but her fears were immediately succeeded by delight when she beheld the unfeigned joy that was depicted on his features. Eugene is alive. He has been hither again. He has revisited this spot, exclaimed Richard. See, Isabella, he has left that indication of his presence. The princess now observed the inscriptions upon the tree. They stood thus: Eugene, December 25th, 1836. Eugene, May 17th, 1838. Eugene, March 6, 1841. Eugene was here yesterday, said Richard. Oh, he still thinks of me. He remembers that he has a brother. Doubtless he has heard of my happiness, my prosperity. Perhaps he even learnt that yesterday blessed me with your hand, dearest Isabella. And that inscription is congratulations, a token of his kind wish alike to you and to me. Isabella partook of her husband's joy, and after lingering for some time upon the spot, they retraced their steps to the mansion. The carriage was already at the door. They entered it, and Richard commanded the coachman to drive to Woolwich. On their arrival at the wharf, where Richard had landed only 2 days previously, they found a barge waiting to convey them on board to the Castelcicalan steamer. The Grand Duke and Grand Duchess, with their suite, received them upon the deck of the vessel. The hour of separation had come. Alberto and his illustrious spouse were about to return to their native land to ascend a throne. The Grand Duke drew Richard aside and said, My dear son, you remember your promise to repair to Montoni so soon as the time of appointment with your brother shall have passed. I shall only be too happy to return with my beloved Isabella to your society, answered Markham. My brother will keep his appointment, for yesterday he revisited the spot where that meeting is to take place and inscribed his name upon the tree that he planted. That is another source of happiness for you, Richard, said the Grand Duke, and well do you deserve all the felicity which this world can give. Your Serene Highness has done all that is in mortal power to ensure that felicity, exclaimed Markham. You have elevated me to a rank only 1 degree inferior to your own. You have bestowed upon me an inestimable treasure in the person of your daughter, and you yesterday placed in my hands a decree appointing me an annual income of £20,000 from the ducal treasury. Your Serene Highness has been too liberal. A fourth part will be more than sufficient for all our wants. Moreover, from certain hints which Signor Viviani dropped when I was an inmate of his house at Pinalla, and subsequently after his arrival at Montoni to take the post of Minister of Finance, which I conferred upon him, and which appointment has met the approval of your Serene Highness, I am justified in believing that in July 1843 I shall inherit a considerable fortune from our lamented friend Thomas Armstrong. The larger your resources, Richard, the wider will be your sphere of benevolence, said the Grand Duke. Then, by way of cutting short our hero's remonstrances in respect to the annual revenue, His Serene Highness exclaimed, "But time presses. We must now say farewell." We shall not dwell upon the parting scene. Suffice it to say that the grief of the daughter in separating from her parents was attempered by the conviction that she remained behind with an affectionate and well-beloved husband, and the parents sorrowed the less at losing their daughter because they knew full well that she was united to one possessed of every qualification to ensure her felicity. And now the anchor was weighed. The steam hissed through the waste valves as if impatient of delay, and the young couple descended the ship's side into the barge. The boat was pushed off, and the huge wheels of the steamer began to revolve on their axis, plowing up the deep water. The cannon of the arsenal thundered forth a parting salute in honor of the sovereign and his illustrious spouse, who were returning to their native land from a long exile. The ship returned the compliment with its artillery as it now sped rapidly along, and the last waving of the Grand Duchess's handkerchief and the last farewell gesture on the part of the Grand Duke met the eyes of Isabella and Richard during an interval when the wind had swept away the smoke of the cannon. The Prince and Princess of Montoni landed at the wharf, re-entered their carriage, and were soon on their way back to Markham Place. Yay! So we did have another happy chapter, which means the next one probably is going to be a little bit tough, but Richard and Isabella are married. Mr. Greenwood, who I am even more certain is Eugene, seems to be starting to have a change of heart. I'm hopeful this means he's going to turn himself around and become a good person by the end of all of this. We'll see. All right, see you in the next chapter.